The sound of metal cuffs clicks shut as Dr. Malcolm Reed, a calm black man in a gray suit, is forced to his knees on the same park bench where his father once wasn't allowed to sit. Officer Cole Warren laughs, calling him boy, while bystanders record in disbelief. The humiliation burns deep, but Reed doesn't resist. He's waiting for the system to expose itself. And when it does, every smirk will fade, because the man they mocked is the FBI director. Would you have stayed silent in his place if this moment shakes you? Hit like and share to keep the truth alive. Now let's begin the story. I was there that late autumn afternoon, sitting 2 benches down at Riverside Park, watching the light slide across the grass. The wind pushed through the sycamores and made the old stone bench creak the way old things do. You'd miss the carving if you weren't looking for it, but he wasn't. He ran his fingertips across the faint words like a scar you can still feel. White residence only 1952. The man was black, maybe 60, neat gray suit, polished shoes, posture that said he respected himself even if the world didn't. Later I'd learn his name, Dr. Malcolm Reed, but in that moment he was just a quiet gentleman resting a hand on history. He stared straight ahead the way people do when they're thinking about someone who isn't there. I heard the phone buzz in his pocket. He answered with a smile you give to someone who knows your habits. "You're there again, aren't you?" A woman said, warm and worried through the speaker. "Just keeping a promise," he told her, eyes still on the bench. He didn't explain the promise. He didn't have to. You could feel it. I don't know why, but I pictured a boy sitting beside his father's legs, too short to touch the ground, and a cop's shadow falling over them. And then I didn't have to imagine anymore because he whispered it to the wind, almost like he was borrowing the park for a minute. "One day, son, sit here without fear." That's when he showed up. Officer Cole Warren, uniform, crisp jaw set hard, chewing his gum like it owed him money. He walked crooked on purpose, a little angle in his stride that said the space belonged to him. He stopped in front of the bench and let his sunglasses slide down just enough to stare. "You lost, old man," he said, the words flat but sharp. The gentleman looked up. No anger, no wobble in the voice. Just waiting for someone. Cole smirked, the kind that invites an audience. "People like you don't belong on that bench." A couple of joggers slowed. A mom with a stroller tugged it closer to her. The park changed temperature. The gentleman Malcolm didn't rise to it. He folded his newspaper once, clean as a crease in a suit. I could read the headline from where I sat when Cole snatched it, tore it straight down the middle and let the pieces flutter to the dirt. FBI announces new police accountability program. The rip made a sound louder than paper should, and a little girl near the swings gasped. "Mommy, why is he so mean?" she asked, voice clear enough to slice the air. It landed on all of us. Some people looked at their shoes. Some people pulled out their phones. Malcolm didn't move. He set his hand back on the stone right over that old carving, like it was a grounding wire. "Officer," he said, still calm, "I'm waiting for someone." Cole stepped closer until he blocked the sun. He didn't lower his voice. "Stand up. Silence has a sound when you pack enough strangers into it." You could hear the chain on the swing, the rattle of a dog's collar, and the first soft clicks of phone cameras recording. I stood, not sure why, just to see it better, or to be closer if it went bad. When Malcolm lifted his chin, it wasn't defiance, it was dignity. "I'll stand when my wife arrives." That was it for Cole. He shoved Malcolm's shoulder hard, performative, then spun him, forcing him down. Knees in the grass, palms on the stone. He said something about orders and compliance, like the words were a rule book only he could read. The little girl started to cry. Her mother put a hand over her eyes, but it was too late. We'd all seen. Cole reached for his cuffs. Malcolm didn't fight. He breathed in once, a calm breath, like a man steadying himself before taking a step he knows he has to take. Click. The metal closed around his wrist. Click. The second cuff bit. He winced, barely more at the memory than the pain. At least that's how it looked from where I stood. Up on the park light pole, the security camera that never seemed to work suddenly decided to. It word adjusted, found Malcolm's face. A tiny red diode blinked the way a heartbeat looks on a hospital screen. None of us noticed, but somewhere else in a building full of screens, somebody did. Later, I'd learned how it unfolded, how a server in D.C. spat out a red banner, like a flare priority Alpha director Malcolm Reed. I'd learned that a woman named Sarah Grant stood so fast her chair rolled back and hit the wall that her hand cut the air as she said, "He's doing it again," testing the system, and that three black SUVs eased out into traffic with their lights off and sirens sleeping. But on the grass in front of us, it was just a quiet man on his knees and a young cop proving a point to anyone who might be watching. Cole hauled Malcolm up by the elbow. The torn newspaper stuck to the sole of his boot. He leaned close, voice tight enough to snap. "You think you can sit anywhere you want?" Malcolm turned his head just enough to look at him. His voice settled low, the kind of low that makes everyone within 10 feet hold their breath so they don't miss a word. "You just touched the wrong man." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even loud. It was a simple sentence in a park filled with people who suddenly remembered how fast a day can turn. A couple of us stepped forward half a step, then froze. Cole shoved him toward the path, and the phones rose higher, a little forest of witnesses. I remember watching the little girl peek through her mother's fingers. I remember the mother shaking her head as if to say, "No, baby, don't learn this," and then nodding at the same time as if to say, "But do remember." They walked past me, the two of them chained together by a choice only one of them was making. Cole kept his hand on the back of Malcolm's neck, like he could push him out of the picture. The breeze lifted, the bench gleamed a little brighter, and somewhere just beyond the trees a siren sighed and then swallowed itself like it had decided to wait. You don't often see a trap close in real time. You don't often see a man hold still on purpose because he trusts what will happen if he does. But I saw it that day, the pressure, the contempt, the phones, the old words on the stone, and I realized I'd be telling this story for a long time because some moments don't ask permission to matter. They make themselves matter. Cole's voice cracked through the radio like a blade. Possible threat, non-compliant male Riverside Park. He sounded puffed up proud, even the way some men do when they think they've found trouble to fix. Static answered first, then Captain Henry Dalton's slow drawl. "Handle it, Warren. Keep it clean." And that was it, permission. Cole pressed Malcolm's head down until his knees hit dirt. The crowd gasped. You could feel the mood shift like air before lightning. His knee dug into Malcolm's back, grinding until the older man winced. Someone shouted, "Get off him!" Another yelled, "He's not fighting you." Phones came up everywhere, red dots blinking. A jogger muttered, "This is why reform matters." Within minutes, that same clip would hit the internet hashtags, blooming comments pouring in, another unarmed black man. Police accountability now. But at that moment, it was just chaos and disbelief. Off to the side, a man stood frozen, a cop off duty, still in gym clothes. Officer Tyler Ross, tossing a frisbee with his little boy, stopped mid-throw. He recognized that face on the ground. 7 years ago, that man, then an FBI investigator, had cleared Tyler's name after a crooked sergeant framed him. Tyler's whole career existed because of Dr. Malcolm Reed. Now that same man was being humiliated in the dirt. Tyler's son tugged at his hand. "Dad, what's happening?" Tyler swallowed hard. "Nothing you should have to see, buddy." But he couldn't look away. He knew the rules: off-duty officers don't interfere with active arrests. But he also knew silence could rot your soul. His jaw tightened, torn between paycheck and principle. When Malcolm lifted his head slightly under the pressure of Cole's knee, their eyes met for half a heartbeat. Malcolm's voice came out calm, almost a whisper. "Don't worry, son. The camera's watching more than you think." It wasn't fear. It was a signal. Cole didn't notice, too busy flexing authority for the crowd. He yanked Malcolm up by the collar and shoved him toward the squad car. The girl who'd asked, "Why is he so mean?" was crying again. Her mother bent low beside her. "Is he bad, Mommy?" The woman's voice trembled, but held steady. "No, sweetheart. The world just doesn't know him yet." Cole slammed the door, metal echoing across the park. Tires kicked gravel as the cruiser rolled away. The phones kept recording, the crowd kept shouting, but Malcolm behind that glass was serene. Because here's what no one knew: the camera catching everything wasn't just a park camera. It was part of an FBI live feed network, one Malcolm himself had installed months earlier for a federal reform pilot. He knew exactly where every lens pointed. So when he sat down on that bench today, he wasn't lost. He wasn't naive. He was testing the system his agency built. He'd chosen this park this day, and even that old bench carved with segregation's ghost, because he knew the right kind of wrong man would show up. And as Cole's patrol car disappeared beyond the trees somewhere in Washington, D.C., servers lit up red again. Federal eyes turned toward a local officer who thought he'd just made another routine arrest. Only this time the suspect had planned every second of it. They led him through the back entrance of Arlington PD, quiet as a funeral. Dr. Malcolm Reed didn't resist. His wrists were cuffed, but his composure stayed untouched. The hum of old fluorescent lights followed him down the hall, the kind that flicker like they're deciding whether to live or die. Every officer who looked his way saw only another arrest. None of them knew the man in those cuffs could end their careers with a single call. At the booking desk, Officer Cole Warren dumped the paperwork with a thud. Resisting arrest, he said casually, like saying the weather was nice. Captain Henry Dalton didn't even look up. He just scribbled his signature across the line. Fine. Log it. Keep it clean. Clean. That word would come back to haunt him. Malcolm stood still, saying nothing. The silence around him wasn't fear, it was strategy. When Officer Ramos rolled the fingerprint scanner forward, no one expected much. He pressed Malcolm's fingers onto the glass thumb, index, middle ring, pinky. The machine beeped twice, then froze. The screen turned red. Match found, Priority Alpha FBI Director Malcolm Reed. The room stopped breathing. Ramos blinked at the words like they couldn't possibly be real. Captain, this says Dalton was already moving. He shoved Ramos aside, slammed the laptop shut so hard it echoed through the bullpen. System glitch, he barked. Ignore it. It's been buggy all week. Cole frowned, confused. Sir, it said I said ignore it. Dalton snapped his voice sharp enough to cut air. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, not anger, fear. Across the room, Officer Dana Pierce froze mid-step. She'd seen plenty of bad calls before, but this wasn't just a bad call. This was panic. Real panic. The kind that only comes when someone knows exactly what they've done wrong. Dalton turned his glare toward her. You didn't see anything, Pierce. Her mouth moved before her brain caught up. Yes, sir. But her eyes stayed locked on the laptop, the closed lid that felt heavier than truth itself. Dalton barked again. Ramos, clear the log. Manual entry. Get him in a cell. Now. Ramos hesitated. Sir, federal protocol requires... Do it, Dalton hissed, or start looking for another job. Cole grabbed Malcolm's arm. His grip was rough, performative. He wanted to feel in control again. Malcolm didn't flinch. As Cole pulled him toward holding, he murmured softly, You really should have read that screen, son. Cole sneered, shoving him through the cell door. You're not in charge here. Malcolm turned, meeting his eyes with quiet certainty. We'll see. The door clanged shut, metal echoing like a verdict. The cell was small walls painted the dull gray of forgotten things. A single bulb buzzed above him, casting more shadow than light. He sat down on the bench, elbows on his knees, breathing evenly. Then under the hum of the light, he whispered to himself, Let's see how deep the rot goes. Across town in a high-security building lined with glass and screens, Deputy Director Sarah Grant stood up so fast her chair hit the wall. The red alert on her monitor pulsed like a heartbeat. Priority Alpha. Director Malcolm Reed. Active detention alert. Her assistant stammered, Ma'am, is that... Real. Sarah's voice was steady but low. It's real. He's doing it again. She opened a secure console, TruthNet, the surveillance and accountability system Malcolm Reed himself had created years earlier. On her screen, hundreds of live feeds came online, park cameras, body cams, station footage. Every move, every word, every lie. She remembered what Malcolm had told her once during the long nights building the system. If truth can see, lies can't hide. Sarah turned to her team. He's not a prisoner. He's running a test. And they just became the subjects. Back inside the cell, Malcolm leaned his head against the cold wall. Through the vent, he could hear muffled voices, Dalton yelling, Pierce hesitating, Cole pacing. The machinery of corruption grinding like it always had. But now every word was being recorded, every keystroke saved. He closed his eyes and smiled faintly. It wasn't arrogance, it was patience. The kind of patience that comes from knowing the truth has already left the room before anyone tries to bury it. Outside, the storm clouds rolled over Arlington, thick and gray, ready to break. Inside, under the weak light of a single bulb, Malcolm Reed waited not for rescue but for revelation. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was about exposure. And before dawn, the truth would come, knocking on Arlington's door. Tyler Ross walked into Arlington PD just before sunset. The kind of light that turns glass into mirrors. His reflection looked wrong, too pale, too anxious, too much like a man about to betray everything he's built. He told the front desk he was checking on a routine arrest. The clerk didn't ask questions. Nobody ever did. Down the hallway, the holding cells waited behind thick glass. Tyler stopped at the window, and the air left his chest. Sitting on the metal bench inside, calm as a priest at confession, was Dr. Malcolm Reed. It hit him like memory, breaking through water. 7 years ago, he'd sat across from that same man in an interrogation room. Back then, Tyler was a rookie caught in a corruption setup, framed for evidence tampering by his own sergeant. They had the reports, the signatures, even a fake witness. His life was over until Reed walked in wearing an FBI badge and a look that said he'd already seen this story too many times. Doing right, Reed had told him, that day cost more than doing nothing. But doing nothing costs your soul. Now here they were again. The same man who saved him was locked in a cell, and Tyler was standing outside it deciding what kind of man he really was. He found Officer Dana Pierce near the records room, her eyes flicking between her computer screen and the hallway like she was guarding secrets. "Pierce," he whispered, "that man, in holding you know who he is." She froze. "Don't," she warned. "Don't say it out loud." "It's Director Reed," Tyler said anyway. "He's testing us." Dana looked around, lowering her voice. "You don't know what you're saying. If we talk, we lose everything. Our jobs, our pensions, maybe worse." Tyler leaned in, his voice trembling with anger. "If we stay silent, we lose more than that." Their eyes met, two officers standing in the gray space between loyalty and fear. The silence between them felt heavier than orders, heavier than law. Then softly Dana asked, "What if it's true? What if he's testing us? Then I guess it's our turn to pass or fail." Tyler said, "And I'm not failing him twice." He slipped his hand into his jacket pocket and pulled out his old access card, the one he'd kept since his patrol days. It wasn't supposed to work anymore, but it still carried enough clearance for archive footage. Together they moved down the corridor, keeping their pace casual, like two officers handling paperwork. Inside the security room, the hum of servers filled the air. Dana's hands shook as she typed in the override. "Body cam footage," Cole warned, Tyler said. The screen came alive. They watched Cole's body cam unfold like a confession. Malcolm sitting on the bench, the insult, the shove, the knee pressed into his back. The sound of the little girl crying. The crowd's silence. The click of handcuffs. Dana covered her mouth. Her eyes filled. "My God, this is why I joined the force," she whispered. "To stop this." And somewhere along the way I forgot. Tyler didn't look at her. His jaw tightened. "Then remember now." He pulled out a flash drive and plugged it in. "We make copies. If Dalton finds this first, it disappears forever." Dana nodded. She stood walking toward the corner security panel. Her fingers moved fast, disabling the live feed from the internal cameras for exactly 3 minutes. "That's all I can buy you," she said. "That's enough." The files transferred bar by bar, each percent heavier than the last. The screen reflected in Tyler's eyes rage, guilt, duty, all tangled into one. He felt his heart pounding in his throat as the loading bar hit 100%. He yanked the flash drive free just as Dana restored the feed. The cameras blinked back to life. No one noticed. Not yet. Dana sank into the chair, her face pale but steady. "You know this will blow up everything," she said quietly. "Dalton, Cole, maybe the whole department." Tyler slipped the drive into his pocket. "Good," he said. "It's time." For a moment, neither spoke. Only the low hum of servers filled the room, carrying the sound of quiet rebellion. As he turned to leave, Tyler looked back once. "Truth hurts," he said softly, "but silence kills." Dana watched him walk away, a mix of fear and admiration tightening her chest. She didn't know if either of them would still have badges by morning, but for the first time in years, she felt like a cop again. Outside Arlington, the night had grown heavy, thick clouds swallowing the moon, the air tight with waiting. Inside the FBI command center, Deputy Director Sarah Grant stood by the screen headset, pressed tight against her ear. The coordinates blinked in red Arlington PD, holding cell B. Her voice was calm, but her eyes weren't. "No sirens, no lights," she said. "Quiet approach. I want this clean." 3 black SUVs and 2 U.S. Marshal vehicles rolled out from the FBI headquarters garage like shadows slipping into motion. Engines low, headlights dimmed. No one on the streets would even know they were coming. Back inside the precinct, Captain Dalton's voice carried like gravel grinding in a tin can. "Ramos, delete the fingerprint record. Now!" Ramos's hands hovered over the keyboard, his palms sweating. "Sir, that's federal interference," he stammered. "If this goes to court," Dalton leaned in close, his jaw, tight breath, sour with fear and rage. "Then be interfering with me." He slammed his fist onto the desk. "Do it." Ramos hesitated, the cursor blinking on the screen like judgment itself. Behind them, Officer Dana Pierce stood by the corner filing cabinet phone, half hidden under a stack of folders. Her thumb hovered over the record button, then pressed it. The quiet click was drowned out by Dalton's voice. "Erase every trace," he ordered. "If this leaks, we're finished." Dana kept her face still, her hands trembling just slightly. The red light on her phone blinked once, recording every word. In the holding cell, Dr. Malcolm Reed sat alone, the same calm expression on his face. The hum of the fluorescent light pulsed in rhythm with his thoughts. He closed his eyes and memory took him back to a different day, a different bench, half a century ago. He was 10. The air smelled like rain and cut grass. His father's hand was rough holding his as they sat under a white residence only sign. Then came the shout, the officer's hand, the slap. He could still feel it, sharp, hot, humiliating. His father had turned to him, eyes steady even through the pain. "One day, son," he'd said, "you'll stand for both of us." Now in the faint light of his cell, Malcolm touched his chest right over his heart and whispered, "Today's that day, Dad." Out in the monitoring room, Dalton stared at the security feed. Malcolm was sitting there, cuffed, quiet, eyes closed and smiling. Dalton frowned. Why the hell is he smiling? Cole, standing nearby, muttered, "Maybe he's lost it." But Dalton didn't buy it. "No," he said, narrowing his eyes. "He's waiting for something." In the cell, Malcolm opened his eyes and glanced toward the ceiling. The small security camera in the corner blinked twice. He tapped his fingertips on the metal table, 3 short knocks, 1 pause, 1 long tap. It sounded like nothing. But miles away in the FBI operations room, an alert flashed across Sarah's screen. "Signal received, Director, read Priority Alpha." He just gave the signal. Sarah said, straightening up, "Move in. Units 1 and 2 approach from the east. Unit 3 secure the south exit." No noise until my mark, her voice commanded through the radio. Every agent on the team knew what that meant. No mistakes, no warnings, no second chances. Back in the precinct, Dana glanced at her phone, her heart hammering. She'd seen the flicker on the hallway monitors. Something in the security system had just pinged. "Something's happening," she whispered to Tyler, who had quietly returned with a look that said he knew. Dalton was still barking orders, trying to erase ghosts from the system, but the ghosts were already recording him. The clock on the wall ticked once. 9:48 p.m. Sarah's voice came through the earpiece of every agent on the move. 12 minutes until breach. Keep channels clear. 12 minutes. 12 minutes before the truth walked through that station door. 12 minutes before every lie Dalton had buried clawed its way out. In his cell, Malcolm sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes calm. Outside, thunder rumbled across the sky, low and distant. The countdown had begun, and this time the world was watching. The air inside Arlington PD changed thick, charged electric. Ramos's fingers hovered over the keyboard one last time, sweat beating at his temples. He whispered to himself, "Just one more line," and hit enter. The monitors blinked, then flared white. Letters burned across the main screen in bold, unforgiving text, "Federal Override. Director Malcolm Reed." A metallic hum rolled through the room as every system in the precinct rebooted. Files, cameras, radios, all hijacked by the same encrypted channel. Dalton stumbled backward, the color draining from his face. Cole froze mid-step, his mouth hanging open. "What? What is this?" No one answered. Every screen on the wall now displayed the same thing: Malcolm's fingerprint, his photo, his FBI credentials, and the federal seal pulsing beneath them. The station fell silent, except for the whir of hard drives spinning up. Then the small red lights on the cameras flicked on, one by one. And just like that, every camera in Arlington PD was streaming live to FBI headquarters. In the holding cell, the metal lock clicked and popped open by remote override. The door swung inward with a hollow groan. Malcolm Reed stood. His cuffs fell to the floor with a quiet clang. He stepped into the light, smoothing his sleeves, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of years. "You knew who I was," he said evenly, his eyes on Dalton. "You saw it on the screen, and you chose to ignore it." Dalton's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked around at the others, their faces pale, their eyes wide. You were provoking chaos," he stammered. "You were testing us." Malcolm took a slow step forward. "No, Captain," he said. "I wasn't provoking chaos. I was revealing it." The words hit harder than any weapon could. Cole's hand twitched toward his holster, but he didn't draw. He was staring at the monitors, each one showing their faces, their actions, their voices, and above them a banner that read, "Live, Federal Broadcast." Dalton turned toward the screen, blinking at the sight of himself frozen in mid-scream. "Oh my God," he whispered. "We're live." "Dear God, we're live," Ramos muttered. "Every feed, every channel. They can see everything." Dalton's breathing turned shallow. The glow of the monitors painted his face red, FBI red. Outside through the blinds, the faint reflection of flashing crimson lights began to dance across the walls. Then came the low rumble of engines. 3 SUVs, 2 Marshal vans. The FBI's arrival wasn't loud, but it was final. Dalton turned to Cole. His voice cracked. "What do we do?" Cole, usually full of bravado, looked smaller now, like a man watching his own downfall in real time. "Sir, what if they're here for us?" Dalton's lips trembled. He looked at Malcolm, still standing tall in the middle of the chaos, his expression unreadable. Then, "Pray he's merciful." Malcolm took one measured breath, then stepped forward until he stood only a few feet away. The tension in the room was thick enough to hear the heartbeat in every chest. "Mercy," he said softly. His gaze moved from Dalton to Cole, steady as judgment itself. He shook his head. "Mercy isn't in the manual today." Outside, the red lights brightened, casting streaks of color through the blinds. The agents were closing in. Inside, every man in that room felt the same sinking weight the moment you realize the truth has already won. The first thing I felt was the building take a breath, like the walls themselves braced. Then the door to the bullpen blew open, and FBI agents poured through a wave of dark vests and steady barrels, followed by U.S. Marshals, locking down every exit with a choreography that said they'd rehearsed this 100 times and never once missed. Boots hit tile in a rhythm that sounded like a verdict coming due. At the front of the line, Deputy Director Sarah Grant moved like a blade. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. "Nobody move," she said, voice cold enough to frost glass. The room obeyed her before it realized it had. Cole's hand hovered over his holster, habit, reflex, pride, then dropped like a confession. He slid the gun away with 2 fingers and let it clatter onto the mat. Captain Dalton didn't move at all. He stood, rooted, eyes pinned to the bank of monitors streaming Live Federal Broadcast, as if by staring hard enough he could crawl into the screens and hide. 2 agents broke right toward Holding. Another pair peeled left, clearing offices with quick glances and even quicker nods. A marshal took Ramos's chair and gently rolled him away from the terminal, hands up, no sudden movements. Professional courtesy to a man whose palms were already sweating through the keys. Sarah crossed the room without breaking stride and stopped in front of the open holding cell. The lock had already been tripped by the federal override. Dr. Malcolm Reed stood inside, sleeves, smooth posture straight, as if he'd been asked to wait a moment outside a conference room instead of inside a cage. An agent stepped forward with keys he didn't need, but ceremony matters. He reached for the cuffs out of habit. There were none. Sarah took in Malcolm at a glance. Hands, wrists, eyes, and let out a breath only people who know him would catch. "Director, are you hurt?" Malcolm's reply was soft enough to make the room lean in. "Just disappointed." For a heartbeat, something human moved across Sarah's face. Then the mask slipped back into place. "Understood." She gave a simple tilt of her head, ready. He nodded always. Behind us, 2 figures emerged from the corridor, moving at the right speed for people who don't want to look like they're rushing and don't dare look like they're strolling. Tyler Ross and Dana Pierce. Tyler's jaw was set so hard a dentist would have called it reckless. Dana's hands shook just a little, enough to prove she was afraid, not enough to stop her. Tyler held up a small black USB drive like it was a match in a dry forest. All files secured, he said to Sarah, speaking fast, before courage could second-guess him. Body cam footage, internal feeds, dispatch logs, booking room audio timestamped. Dana extended a second dry voice, low but steady, redundancy, and a recording of Captain Dalton ordering the deletion of a federal alert. She didn't look at Dalton when she said it. She looked at Malcolm, and Malcolm gave her the kind of nod that can carry a person through a year of cold shoulders. Dalton finally found his mouth. He pointed at them like an accusation could rewind time. "You'll destroy everything," he barked, the kind of shout that hope's volume can substitute for moral ground. Dana didn't blink. Then maybe it shouldn't exist. Sarah took both drives with a gloved hand, passed them to a tech agent already booting a forensic tablet. "Chain of custody starts now," the tech murmured as if narrating to history. Cole stood with his back against a filing cabinet, the steel humming softly against his spine. He looked at Malcolm the way a man looks at a mirror when he isn't ready for it. The loudness was gone from him, no more bark, no swagger left to burn. Just a young cop who finally understood that an hour could rearrange a life. Malcolm stepped into the open, the squad falling back around him like tied around a rock. He turned to Tyler first. No speech, no ceremony, just a single nod, weighty, grateful, unmissable. Tyler's eyes shone. He swallowed hard like a promise he wasn't going to let spill out. Outside noise gathered, tires crunching, radios, crackling, voices rising from the sidewalk. People had come, neighbors, joggers, parents with kids on their hips. The girl from the park perched on her mother's shoulder again. Phones rose in a quiet salute. The glass of the front doors flickered with 100 small screens, trying not to shake. Inside, marshals fanned out behind Dalton and Cole. Hands hovered, not yet touching. Sarah gave the smallest nod, and two agents stepped toward Dalton. "Captain Henry Dalton," an agent said, voice level. "You're being detained pending federal review." Dalton looked past the agent to the window where the echo of red lights washed over blinds like a tide he couldn't stop. The last of his color left him. He wasn't a captain in that second. He was a man who'd spent too long putting paint over rot and calling it a wall. Cole's gaze flicked from the agents to Malcolm and back, searching for a door that didn't exist. "Sir," he whispered to Dalton, "what do we do?" Dalton's mouth worked around a long, dry swallow. He didn't answer the way a leader does. He answered the way a drowning man does. "Pray he's merciful." Malcolm regarded Cole for a long moment, the uniform, the clenched jaw, the way the right hand kept twitching toward authority it no longer owned. He spoke like a sermon that doesn't need a pulpit. "Fear built your power," he said. "Now it's building your prison." Cole's eyes closed. Just for a second. Sometimes a sentence lands and you can feel bone understand it. Sarah lifted her chin. "Begin transfers." Cuffs clicked, clean, practiced, undeniable. Not the clumsy metal bite we'd heard in the park. This sound had order to it, process, consequence, measured out gram by gram. A marshal read writes in a cadence that belongs to a country that tries, fails, and tries again. As they turned Dalton, he looked at Malcolm with something almost like plea. "This will tear the department apart," he said. Malcolm didn't flinch. "Then you build it wrong." They walked the two men toward the front, the bullpen-parted officers lining the aisle like an honor guard for a funeral no one admitted aloud. Some stared at the floor. Some stared at Malcolm. A few stared at Dana and Tyler with a cocktail of gratitude and fear that would take months to name. When the doors opened, the sound of the crowd came in on a wave, hushed then swelling. Phones rose higher. Somewhere a reporter asked a question that didn't matter. The picture mattered. What we were all about to remember mattered. Dalton stepped into the night with his hands bound and his head down. Cole followed, smaller than he'd ever let himself be. Red and blue washed their faces. The girl on her mother's shoulder peered around a screen, eyes wide, trying to understand the math of justice. Behind them, framed in the doorway, Malcolm stood next to Sarah. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just stood the way you stand when you've carried something heavy a long way and finally set it down where it belongs. Director Sarah asked softly. He nodded once. "Proceed." And the building, this tired building that had learned the shape of too many excuses, exhaled. The night took the men who had mistaken authority for truth. The cameras caught it. The city watched it. And somewhere far from the lights and the noise, an old bench under old trees held still, as if to say it had seen worse and would remember this too. Across America, screens flickered to life. News anchors went silent mid-sentence as the Attorney General Harold Morrison appeared at a podium flanked by the federal seal. His tone was steady, almost solemn. Effective immediately, he said the Department of Justice is releasing full unedited footage of the Arlington incident recorded and transmitted by FBI Director Malcolm Reed. The video began to roll nationwide. It started in Riverside Park, a quiet autumn afternoon. A man reading a paper, a uniformed officer approaching. Then the shove, the taunt, the sound of cuffs clicking. Millions watched the moment the little girl's voice cut through the noise. "Mommy, why is he so mean?" No narration followed. None was needed. The question alone seemed to echo across living rooms, classrooms, and precincts. At the federal hearing the next day, the accused sat in front of the same screens, replaying their actions. Captain Dalton's face was gray, drawn tight by sleeplessness. His voice came low, almost to himself. "I thought I was keeping peace," he said. Malcolm, seated across from him, didn't raise his tone. "You weren't keeping peace, Captain," he said. "You were keeping silence." The words landed like a verdict no gavel could improve. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Kesha Washington, who'd filmed the arrest, told how her hands shook as she tried not to cry behind her phone. Marcus Freeman, a teacher, described watching it with his students, how the room went still, and half his class stopped looking at the screen because they'd seen it before too many times. And James Murphy, a retired officer, spoke softly. "When I saw that man kneel on the ground, I saw myself 30 years ago. Only difference is no one was recording then." Dalton bowed his head. The courtroom waited. His fingers toyed with the badge on his chest, tracing its edges like a memory he couldn't let go of. Then finally it slipped from his grasp and fell to the table with a dull clang. "I wore this for 30 years, he said through tears, "and it wore me back." From the bench, Attorney General Morrison read the findings. Civil rights violations, conspiracy to falsify records, obstruction of federal oversight. The list rolled on, slow and heavy. Behind him, the flag barely stirred in the still air. When the reading ended, Sarah Grant, poised unflinching, addressed the reporters gathering at the door. "Justice doesn't whisper anymore," she said. "It roars." Malcolm stood beside her, the cameras flashing white against his calm. "This isn't revenge," he said quietly. "It's repair." And that was the difference the moment the story stopped being about punishment and became about rebuilding. Outside the courthouse, people stood shoulder to shoulder, not cheering, not shouting, just watching. Some cried. Some held up their phones. Others simply breathed out as if they'd been holding that breath for decades. The final frame of the broadcast froze on Malcolm's face as he turned toward the crowd. Behind him, sunlight struck the scales of justice carved into the courthouse wall. For once, those scales didn't look heavy. They looked balanced. And across the country, in homes and parks and classrooms, people finally felt what justice could sound like. Not a hammer striking wood, but a truth long denied finding its voice. 2 months later, Arlington felt different. The same streets, the same precinct, but the silence had changed. It no longer carried fear. It carried reflection. Under the Attorney General's directive, Arlington PD was placed under federal supervision for 24 months. Every patrol car, every booking room, every body cam now streamed directly to a public oversight board. The badge still meant authority, but now it came paired with accountability. Inside the precinct's main hall, the air was thick with unease and new beginnings. Reporters lined the back row, community members filled the aisles, and officers, some shamed, some redeemed, sat upright in dress blues. At the front stood Dr. Malcolm Reed, the man who'd turned a local scandal into a national awakening. Beside him were two faces the public now knew well: Tyler Ross, straight-backed and humble, and Dana Pierce, calm but fierce, her eyes resolute. The ceremony was short, but every word mattered. Malcolm lifted the microphone. His voice carried the weight of truth, but also a strange gentleness. Today, he began, "We don't celebrate power, we celebrate choice." He looked at Tyler, then at Dana. "Courage isn't born from orders," he said, pausing just long enough for the words to settle, "but from choice. The choice to act when it costs you most. The choice to speak when silence is safer. The choice to rebuild what others broke." The room was still. Even the cameras seemed to listen. He turned toward the audience. Captain Tyler Ross will lead this precinct with transparency and service as his compass. Officer Dana Pierce will head internal affairs because reform without integrity is just decoration. Tyler accepted the promotion with a nod, though his eyes betrayed disbelief. "I'll try to earn what he already believes I can be," he said quietly. Dana followed, shaking Malcolm's hand, her grip firm. "We'll do this right," she promised. Outside those walls, change was already reaching the people. The Department of Justice overturned dozens of wrongful charges, the victims exonerated, their names cleared, and compensation finally granted. For the first time, headlines used the word healing. At home later that evening, Malcolm sat on the porch, the day's speeches behind him. The night smelled faintly of rain. His wife Clara stepped out with 2 mugs of coffee and that same look she'd worn since the park, love mixed with exasperation. "You scared me half to death," she said softly, setting the cup beside him. Malcolm chuckled, his hand finding hers. "He couldn't sit on that bench," he said, eyes drifting toward the distance. "Now everyone can." Clara smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "And was it worth all this trouble?" He glanced upward, the faintest grin on his lips. "Only if they remember why." A car pulled up in the driveway. Sarah Grant stepped out, still in her blazer, still carrying the weight of too many meetings and too few hours of sleep. She walked up the steps, half a smile breaking through. "You always did like poetic justice," she teased. Malcolm laughed softly. "It's the only kind that teaches," he said. "The rest just punishes." They sat in easy silence for a while, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of the city that had almost lost itself. The next morning, sunlight spilled across Riverside Park, now restored and renamed. A small crowd gathered around the new bronze plaque mounted near the old bench, the same one where everything had started. Children played nearby, chasing each other through the fallen leaves, unaware that history had been rewritten in this very spot. The inscription gleamed under the light, "In memory of 23 victims, in honor of truth." Malcolm stood quietly beside the bench, running his fingers over the engraving. The past was still there, etched, not erased, but for the first time it felt like something had finally been set right. Clara joined him, slipping her hand into his. The breeze carried laughter, and somewhere a mother's voice called to her child, not in fear but in peace. And for the first time in a long while, Malcolm Reed smiled, not as the FBI director, not as the man tested by injustice, but simply as someone who'd kept a promise made long ago on a segregated bench and lived to see the world sit beside him. 3 years later, Riverside Park was alive again. The trees had grown fuller, the paths cleaner, the old wounds softer around the edges. Morning light spilled across the grass, golden and quiet, touching the same bench where history had once held its breath. Captain Tyler Ross stood at the edge of the path, hands clasped behind his back. In front of him, a group of new recruits, fresh uniforms, nervous energy, eager eyes waited for him to speak. He didn't start with rules or regulations. He pointed toward the old stone bench. "Here," he said, his voice calm but steady. 3 officers forgot what their badge meant. And one man reminded the world. The rookies turned to look. Some had seen the footage in training, others had only heard the story whispered like a lesson passed down. But seeing it, the place itself made it real. The bench wasn't just marble and metal, it was memory carved in stone. A few yards away, a middle-aged man sat quietly with a folded newspaper resting on his knee. It was Marcus Freeman, the teacher who'd testified at the hearing years ago. He read in peace, no eyes watching him with suspicion, no cameras waiting for outrage. Around him, children chased one another, black, white, brown, laughing in the same air. 2 little girls, one dark-skinned, one pale, sat on the bench, sharing a bag of chips, crumbs falling like confetti. No one cared about color, no one had to. The bench had done its job. Tyler turned back to his recruits. "You'll wear this badge," he said, tapping the emblem over his heart. "It will open doors for you. It'll close others. People will trust it or fear it. But remember this, your badge doesn't make you right. Your actions do." The recruits nodded. He could see the words landing, some heavier than others. One of them, a young woman with freckles and fire in her eyes, raised her hand. "Sir, is it true you knew Director Reed?" Tyler smiled faintly. "Knew him, he's the reason I'm standing here." Across the park, 2 figures watched from under the shade of an elm tree. Malcolm Reed, a little older now, stood with his arm around Clara, His hair had silvered more, but the steadiness in his eyes hadn't aged a day. Clara leaned against him, smiling as the recruits surrounded the bench. "The bench finally belongs to everyone," she said softly. Malcolm looked at her, then back at the laughter and light before them. "It always did," he said. "Some people just had to see it." They stood there in silence for a while, watching the way sunlight hit the bronze plaque. "In memory of 23 victims, in honor of truth." A breeze carried the faint sound of children's laughter and the soft bark of a distant dog. Somewhere, a radio played an old gospel tune, drifting just loud enough to be heard, as if the park itself remembered the words. As the camera panned back, Tyler's voice carried over the scene, steady and reverent. "Power fears three things," he said: cameras, courage, and truth. The shot widened, showing the park alive with color, people walking, families gathering, strangers smiling at one another. "The bench is still here," his voice continued softer now, "and so is justice." The screen began to fade as gentle piano music rose in the background, warm, tender, full of hope. The melody lingered like sunlight on water. Malcolm and Clara started walking toward the bench, hand in hand. A little boy ran past them, laughing, his toy plane swooping through the air. He tripped near the bench, and before Malcolm could move, a young white officer bent down, helped him up, brushed off his knees, and smiled. The boy ran off again, unafraid, unscarred. Clara glanced at Malcolm with a knowing look. He smiled, eyes following the boy. "That's what it was all for," he murmured. The music swelled one last time, then faded into stillness. The final image stayed the old bench under the golden morning light, no longer a symbol of division, but of what happens when people choose to stand to speak and see. And as the screen dimmed to black, the last line appeared in white letters, simple, timeless, and true. "The bench is still here, and so is justice." Soft piano fades out. Silence. Then the faint sound of children laughing. And that was the bench of tomorrow. A story not just about justice, but about growth, courage, and the power to change what we once accepted as normal. It reminds us that truth isn't loud, but when it finally speaks, it can move a nation. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in fairness, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful tales like this one. Every click, every share, every word of encouragement gives our team the strength to keep creating stories that matter. Stories that speak for those who couldn't, and remind us that compassion is the greatest kind of power. Because here at Mr. Mac's Stories, we believe one thing above all: justice lives on when we keep telling the truth.